Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our networking webinar for National RTAP Managers. Today, we have 4 great presentations on best practices in direct technical assistance. But before we begin, let's take a look at the agenda. Next slide, please. After a brief introduction, we'll be hearing presentations on 4 direct technical assistance programs from the states of California, Florida, Kansas, and New York. From California, today we have Jackie Montgomery, who is the Executive Director of Talansky, and we have Mark Cody, who is a Transit Safety, Security, and RTAP Transit Manager for the California DOT. After that, from Florida, we have Jay Goodwill, Senior Research Associate at Cutter. From Kansas, we have Pat Weaver, Program Manager of Kansas RTAP and Associate Director of Outreach and Technology Transfer at KU Transportation Research Institute. Lastly, from New York, we have Bill Telovsky, Acting 5311 Program Manager with the New York State DOT. And as Frank said, at the end of it, we'll be fielding all of your questions. Through a survey of state RTAP managers, we learned that there was an interest in networking opportunities between managers in different states. It was decided that the preferred way to do this was through quarterly webinars, during which managers presented best practices and there could be discussion based on the material that was presented. The first webinar with this format took place in May, which I'm sure some of you participated in, and the topic was state-level driver training programs. We had a great series of presentations then, and I'm looking forward to hearing today's speakers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speakers, Jackie and Mark.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, Mark, I think he was going to start out. Are you there, Mark? Okay. If you guys don't mind, I'm gonna wait one more second for Mark.
Can you hear me okay?
There now.
Oh, good, okay. Technical difficulties persist. Good morning, this is Mark Cody with California Department of Transportation. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
No?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, we're fortunate enough, we contract out our RTAP, our RTAP services to California CalAct Association for California Association for Coordinated Transportation. Jackie Montgomery is on the line, and this presentation really belongs to her because she does all the work. And I'm going to turn it over to her, and at the very end, I'm going to follow up with a couple directional notes of where we're going from here. But Jackie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for everyone on the call. And please text us or send some questions. I'll be happy to answer them at the end. We have a lot of different types of technical services that we provide through the RTAP program and fold them in. And some of them we do individual technical assistance where we provide one-on-one assistance to someone. I'll talk a little more about that later. Educational workshops, either individual workshops. They can be 1- or 2-day workshops, or we also do some workshops at our conferences. We've hosted several webinars. We want to do more. We've broken them up into 2 days and 3-day webinars and 1-day webinars. We do a lot of different conference sessions. Usually at our conferences, we have 26 sessions, and at least 13 or more, 50% of them are dedicated to rural topics for our rural operators, for the RTAP recipients. We do rodeos. We've done, and I'll talk a little more about them in a little bit, legislative briefings. We have a lot of library materials, which include DVDs and materials from National RTAP and other programs that we check out to our rural agencies. We've been doing weekly electronic newsletters and articles that provide information on what Caltrans is doing as far as, like, say, right now they're doing a state management review, and we're sending that out to people so that they know what's going on. They have a safety and security workshop going on, so we try to collaborate a lot with Caltrans to make sure we're getting out additional information from them on what's happening on the state level when grants are opening up. So we include all that, post on our website, and of course we offer scholarships. I think 1/4 of our funding is used for direct scholarships to help people go to NTI, TSI, conferences, and other types of workshops that they need. And then we also promote, and I didn't have it on the list here, a paratransit certificate training program for new transit managers. And there's a Caltrans has provided some scholarships for the tuition for that. But if some of our attendees need assistance for getting there for their room and board and travel, we pay for that out of the RTAP scholarships also. Next slide. Next slide, please. The services that we provide are individual technical assistance. The services are provided by consultants, Caltrans staff, CALAC staff, and transit agency staff themselves. Sometimes we have, as I'm sure all of you do, professionals out there in different transit agencies that we call upon to do different parts of training that may have expertise or have done really good grant applications. So we've asked them to come in and provide some technical assistance either in a workshop or individual technical assistance. Next slide. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you,
Yes,
Jackie.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. If you guys could advance the slide.
Yeah.
Okay, the types of individual technical assistance that we do, we've reviewed procurement RFPs, applications, and contracts for federal and state compliance. We make sure that, like, they're meeting Davis-Bacon Act, that they're meeting third-party contracting requirements. As you know, procurement RFPs are very complicated, so we're trying to do a lot of technical assistance on that since it's been a big finding of FTA. And we usually do those individually. We have a couple consultants, including myself, that have reviewed those and provided feedback to Caltrans and the Rural Transit Agency on what they need to do to improve. We've provided individual technical assistance on ADA, where people have specific questions on ADA issues, drug and alcohol, personnel policy reviews and assistance, review of federal programs and applicability to transit agencies. We help review grant applications for eligibility and content to see if they qualify for federal funding. For example, our recent round of 5311F capital applications, some people weren't sure if they qualified, so we went through the criteria of qualifications, what they needed to do to their project to make it eligible for that project, or like say that they needed to carry luggage and have infrequent stops, those kinds of things. We would go through that and help them with their application so they could qualify for funding. If we don't have a resource, we try to find a resource out there. I'll call other state RTAP managers or programs or even look on the internet to try to find the information that they need. We do quite a bit of that if it's something we don't currently have. We do maintenance training. I think I talk about a little bit later. We have maintenance conferences. We have a list of maintenance briefings and assistance, and then we do driver programs and training, and then of course we do program management assistance for brand new program managers. For example, we just had a new transit manager start at a very small rural agency that at least 50% of their training is volunteer drivers, and they've never run a transit program before. So we sat down probably almost 6 hours individually with them and went over all the drug and alcohol federal requirements, the driver's duty, pre-trip inspections. They didn't understand the importance of pre-trip inspections, gave him additional library materials to read, and then he came back with more questions. So we do quite a bit to try to help the managers do their job. Next slide. We provide 15 to 20 webinars and workshops a year. As you can see, the list of topics, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's some other ones we do. We've done third-party contracting, we've done procurement, contract negotiations, mobility management. We also coordinate with TSI and MTI, like the rest of you, to offer their training classes through the RTAP program also. Next slide. We pride ourselves on our rodeos. We've been doing rodeos since before my time at CALAC for several years. We started doing something new the last couple years. We've been doing regional rodeos because in California we lost a lot of our, in fact, all of our state funding for transit programs. So we kind of took our rodeos on the road and did a northern, central, and southern California regional rodeo, so people only had to travel a couple hours. And then we did a national, our state rodeo, to qualify everybody for nationals. And the thing that we always do a 2-day rodeo, because the first day includes securement training on the wheelchair securement, sensitivity training, pre-trip inspections and maintenance. We go over the CDL license and testing. We try to also give a test that's similar to what they give at the national rodeo, so they're prepared for that. One thing we found is before we started doing that, that was one area where our drivers were missing some of the questions at the National Rodeo. And of course, we've gone over some of the new ADA requirements. Recently, at the last one, we talked about some of the recommendations from the Access Board as far as giving people more space to secure wheelchairs. And I'm happy to say that I think as a result of having our rodeos in the last 5 or 4 years, we've had 4 or 5 drivers in the top 5, at least every year. And this year we had first, and 2 years ago we had a first-place driver. So we're really proud of our rodeos and how well our drivers do. Next, we do 2 conferences a year. And next slide. And we, like I said before, we usually have 26 sessions in those conferences. You can see the different topics that we do. I'm not going to go into those. And at least 50% of them really are dedicated to specific rural topics. I think one of the things that we try to do, we have a conference committee that includes a lot of people that are on our RTAP advisory board, and a lot of rural agencies are on our conference committee, so they have input into what types of sessions. So we use surveys, conference evaluations for what they need, and our conference committee to help us decide what sessions the rural agencies need to do their job and what they're interested in attending. The other thing we're fortunate to be able to do at our conferences, we try to do at least 2 days of professional development training that's through Caltrans Planning. They help pay for a couple speakers, and our certificate program, a couple of our colleges have paid for some of the professors to come in and do professional development training. For example, our next conference, we're going to have a full day of a grant writing class followed up with technical writing for the people that have done grant writing but need to enhance their writing skills and work on that. And then I know a lot of people do a vendor show, but we really try to make sure that we get our rural agencies involved and engaged at our vendor show. We offer prizes to get them to go out and see the buses and meet the companies so they know who to call when they have a problem with their vehicle or they have a problem with their equipment, that they get to know the vendors and can talk to them, attend some of their trainings that they offer. So we do a lot of different things to try to get training to our agencies. Next. I just have a slide there. The one on the right is from our bus show that we did at Monterey. We usually can't afford a convention center, so what we traditionally do is have our bus show outside during lunch or have a reception, and we found if we have lunch and we give them extra time during lunch that we actually are able to get people on the vehicles and looking at the vehicles and looking at the changes that they've made. So that was just a slide to show you a little bit about our bus shows, what they look like. Next slide. Other training, I think I mentioned them a little bit. Our maintenance, we do 2-day conferences. We do workshops. We do have a Yahoo group, roundtable discussion group where someone can post a question and then we respond. We did have a listserv, but we changed it to the Yahoo groups because a lot of people were posting things that we didn't want on there, so this way we control it. We have a lot of library materials, as I mentioned before. I already mentioned newsletters, scholarships. Legislative updates, I didn't talk about that a lot. We have RTAP pays for part of a legislative mobilization coordinator that provides information on what's going on at the state and federal level with legislation, and they give us weekly and monthly written reports. We do 2 calls a month that all the rural agencies can participate in to receive updates, ask questions of the legislative coordinator, and they also will provide information on how they can get involved, if they need to write a letter, what that should do. We've done trainings with our legislative mobilization coordinator at our conferences and workshops on how they can advocate for their programs without lobbying. And then the other thing is, like I said, we support the Paratransit Certificate Program, which is about a 10-class program. It's 10 one-day classes to help the new transit manager understand rules and regulations, budgeting, run cutting, planning, marketing, all of those topics, and we really encourage people to do that. So last, I'm going to turn over, I put our contact information there on the next slide if you guys want to contact us about anything. There's other things that we've done in the past. Like I said, we've done special mobility management conferences, and we try to do and wrap up whatever it takes basically for our rural agencies to do their job. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mark.
Okay. Wow, Jackie, you do a lot. Thank you for what you do. Okay, next slide, please. There we go. Well, what I wanted to just talk about was where do we go from here? We're trying to keep this program very dynamic. We take an annual survey of the subrecipients, and this year I highlight 4 things that came out of the survey with percentages. 53% of respondents have utilized the RTAP scholarships. We think this is a really great component of the program, and looking at the next contract period, looking at increasing the amounts of scholarship funding so we can get more people to more trainings. Second, 86% of agencies would like to see a listserv, and I'm aware of the Yahoo groups. The subrecipients would like to see something on the RTAP website, so maybe Jackie, you and I can work to make that happen in a way that works for everybody. The third one, 78% of respondents are interested in a mentoring program where we're matching the new transit managers, like the one Jackie was talking about, with experienced transit managers, so that Jackie's not spending all her time, or CALAC's not spending all their time with the new agencies and the new managers, but we can actually pair up experienced managers with new managers so that they can, call with the quick questions and help them sort of assimilate into transit management. We think it's a good idea, and obviously 78% of the subrecipients out there are interested in such a program. So we're looking to start that up in the next contract period. The most frequently requested technical assistance topics, civil rights, third-party contracting, procurement, project management, national transit database. No surprise there. And that's where we'll look to CALAC to focus their training on, because this is what the subrecipients have said they're interested in. Next slide, please. Okay, and basically what we'd like to do based on this survey is look at some program enhancements. Want to keep it dynamic. First one is working with Jackie to reestablish a listserv on the RTAP website. Second is get that peer-to-peer mentoring program off the ground, and we've gotten a lot of interest both from the new managers and also the experienced managers that this would be a valuable program for them. And the other is increased use of webinars, much like we're doing right now, getting the information out in a low-cost method so that we can, instead of spending all our money getting people to places, get all these trainings on webinars, and we think it's a better use of resources and people's time. So we're going to look at increasing and having more and more webinars going forward. And that's all I have to say, and I just want to take the time again to thank Jackie for all the work that she does. She does an awesome job. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jackie and Mark. Next, we will have Jay Goodwill with Cutter. Jay?
Okay. Good afternoon. It's almost afternoon anyway. Mike Wright would be my Mark's equivalent. He's the Florida DOT RTAP manager, and then I'm under contract, or Cutter is under contract with DOT to manage the Florida RTAP program. Next slide. We'll go one more, please. Okay, just to give you a little idea, and we're structured a little different, and our approach is around that, but Cutter stands for the Center for Urban Transportation Research, and we're located at the University of South Florida in Tampa. It was established by the Florida legislation in 1988, and as part of that, we've developed a very strong relationship with Florida DOT, especially their transit office. Next slide. And then the relationship with DOT is within Cutter. This is the group I'm assigned with. It's a technical training and transit training and technical assistance. And as you can see, the RTAP is just one of many programs or efforts that we reach out for. And there's some, that are combined. And what we're trying to do is take advantage of this network and other services provided in these other programs and our knowledge and interaction of either that we're working on together or others. Next slide, please. This is kind of the focus of where, when the question came of technical assistance, initially my first thought was the RTAP program really doesn't provide direct technical assistance, but then the more I thought about it, we provide it in a lot of other ways, and we really design a lot of our training programs and outreach programs related to the needs for technical assistance. The RTAP program itself has a lot of the same functions that the others have discussed, or others state programs have. We have the website, we have a resource center, we have quarterly newsletters, we help host the state rodeo, and then we provide some training directly, and then we network with some other groups and enhance the training. The particular in many of these, like the bus operator training, is set up as a MIGIN sponsored and funded, and we're very fortunate to have a real strong relationship with the Florida DOT, both the central office and the district offices. But they provide training, operator training, more geared toward the fixed route or larger systems, but many of the subjects are very crossover, and the rural RTAP and small and rural systems can take advantage of it. We have the Maintenance Analysis Research Center that can assist people. And then we have the bottom of that list is the three big workshops in the state of Florida. We have a professional development workshop in the spring that's really aimed more toward training and professional development. We have the State Transit Association's annual conference in the fall. And then in Florida, we have a Commission for Transportation Disadvantage, which focuses really on the small and rural areas. And we try to work closely with the Commission and actually help work closely with them, and they have their annual conference, which is coming up next week, to help influence the course selection, and then RTAP is sponsoring or facilitating some sessions specifically under the umbrella of the RTAP program. The one last program, I guess there's two I really want to talk about, is the Transit Research Inspection Procurement Services, which we call TRIPS, is a service that DOT offers, and it provides vehicle procurement for anything from a van to small cutaways, and now they even get mid-sized buses, where the common specs are developed, the bid process is undertaken under the umbrella of the state, and then the transit agencies or the small rural and social service agencies can actually order off this and be in full compliance with all the federal requirements. And also the state provides inspection and oversight of the program. So the quality of the buses becomes much better. The procurement process is sped up. And then they actually use this for the buses that are funded through 5310 and 5311. Well, 5310 must go through this program and select it. There's enough variety of buses that the need can be to fit the agencies. Next slide, please. This is kind of a recap where we don't really provide the direct technical assistance. We really can get to it and really almost respond to any need that's out there. We work with our different partners, whether it's the State Transit Association, the Transportation Disadvantage, the Florida Department of Transportation, and many of the topics of the training sessions, workshops, and conferences are very flexible and respond to it. I'm and several others here are actively involved in all the workshops and conferences and have a lot of input of the topics being said. The DOT we're kind of gifted, but they also support different network agencies in the areas of planning, marketing, maintenance, operations. And they also provide, for the smaller systems, a safety, or not a safety, but a substance abuse program where a lot of the drug, alcohol testing requirements. And then there's a person under contract with Cutter, again, to go and make sure and train the agencies and assist them with the reporting and also the statewide audit when that occurs. So it's generally Florida does a more of a comprehensive approach. RTAP may not take credit or get credit for some of them, but we use our influence and network with several of the others, and we're actively involved here or through our partners involved. And that's kind of a recap of what we do. It's similar to many other states, but it's probably packaged slightly different. Next slide. And that's really the here are the contacts, both Mike Wright, the state manager, and then the four primary people here at Qatar, including myself, that that manage it. We'd be happy to provide any information or answer any questions that people may have. But thank you.
Great, thank you, Jay. Next, we have Pat Weaver with Kansas University Transportation Research Institute. Pat?
Oh, thank you, Shannon. Good morning, everyone. Next slide, Frank. Just by way of kind of a quick overview of our program and the structure, and a little bit about Kansas. We have approximately 153 agencies in 105 counties, so we have a large number of sub-grantees that are in the process of organizing in a different way, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute. Basically, we are under contract with KDOT to provide the RTAP program, as well as a number of kind of applied research programs related to transit over the years. But Jim Perez is our program manager with KDOT under the Office of Public Transportation. Next slide. Kind of looking at the major program components that we provide, a training program that includes managers and drivers, community leaders and planners. We also publish a quarterly newsletter, which is more oriented to more technical topics on a quarterly basis, as well as fact sheets and some other publications, resources that are produced for use by the rural agencies. We also have a video and publication lending library, although I have to say that we have a number of items in that library, but it's one of the areas in which there's been kind of declining use of that and more use of online resources. So we're kind of looking at evaluating how that fits into the overall program, and how we see that developing and kind of evolving into the future. And then we have a component of direct technical assistance and applied research, and that can take a variety of forms, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. Next slide. Kind of, as I kind of was thinking about this and making this presentation, I was thinking about what I saw as kind of the essential components of our technical assistance program, and as Jay said, kind of teasing out what's direct technical assistance versus what's assistance given to agencies as far as through training, and that might be classified as technical assistance. But I tried to kind of pull out those items that look more like the direct technical assistance, and kind of what the characteristics of those are, and what some of the kind of the issues are around those. And one has been in terms of the ability to be responsive, that we often those requests for direct technical assistance are not ones that are always anticipated at the beginning of a project year. They're more ad hoc requests and things that evolve around hot topics, and so it makes it difficult to plan ahead. But one of the things that we've really worked to do with the program is to try to be as responsive as we could within the resources that we had available. Another essential component of our program, and being based at the university, is that we've had graduate research assistants involvement in the program, generally from the urban planning program, which has served to increase our capacity, stretch funding, and plus it's been great experience. The feedback that I've gotten from the students over the years has been a great experience from them. They do a lot of the synthesis, some of the analysis, often reporting the results in newsletter articles and that kind of thing, which has often helped them to get jobs fairly quickly. We have multiple modes of delivery, which I'll talk about here in just a minute, and kind of a component of the technical assistance, or something that we keep in the back of our mind, is that the RTAP program is not intended to overlap or compete with the role of consulting firms. And so kind of going into those requests that we may get from agencies and looking at what the appropriate role for RTAP is, and then when it kind of goes beyond that scope and moves into an area in which we feel it should be referred to, to other resources to be involved with. So next slide. I'm kind of looking at those forms of technical assistance in the state. We developed toolkits and handbooks that might be either online or they're hard copies, and then that may then be delivered, or an orientation to those toolkits or handbooks provided in a on-site meeting or some other distribution to the agencies. Some limited planning assistance, more around the planning assistance often is more around either proof of concept or kind of modeling a particular process that can be used by a number of different agencies. Developing white papers, some facilitated meetings, and then answering regulatory questions around the program, much like the other presenters have discussed, and then that information being delivered in a variety of ways, either fact sheets, direct response through email, and on occasion on-site meetings or training, those kinds of things. So next slide. An example of one particular project that kind of involved a number of different ways of, oops, my screen just went blank here, just a second, that used a variety of ways in terms of direct technical assistance was the process that surrounded the development of coordinated public transit human service plans, and that we developed a web-based toolkit, and an example of any good RTAP program that begs, borrows, and steals from other RTAP programs or other DOTs, and so our web-based toolkit was modeled after a couple of others that were had already been developed and were online. We also maintain a subscription to Zoomerang and are able to do web-based surveys and use those for a variety of purposes, and in this case we use that to conduct stakeholder surveys associated with the program, and then provide those results back to each of the planning groups. We also then developed a process for facilitated meetings, and then some draft final reports as a model that was then used in several different areas in the state. Next slide, please. Just a couple of examples of other types of technical assistance or other topics that we provided in terms of some questions that had come up in the state in terms of dialysis treatment, and really as a kind of a precursor to the state getting involved with Medicaid brokerage program, and did some research activity around that, and then also working with some of the provider agencies, particularly in the very rural communities, portions of Kansas, which is a fairly large part of the state, actually, a large percentage, and then provided the results of that information to the stakeholders. And then another example is our state is evolving. We have a coordinated transit district system in place now, which is 15 coordinated districts, but it's more administrative rather than operational, and with some additional state funding that was, some increase in state funding that was promised as almost doubling of funding to public transit in the state that passed last year. So that's the reward, but the task ahead is to develop more regionalized operational systems in the state with one-call centers. And so we provided a lot of the technical support in terms of developing some of those pilot projects in the state, really looking at some ways for those to organize around travel markets, and did some work in that area. Next slide, please. Just another example in terms, and this is work that was done by the urban planning students and some GIS support for some of the planning activities of those regionalized systems. Next slide. Also, transit route studies, and I mentioned that kind of proof of concept. So we're not, the RTAP program is not in the business of doing transit route studies, but we did have a number of rural communities that traditionally had operated with demand response service only, and we're looking to move into fixed route service. And so, developing a process for those communities to use in terms of looking at feasibility of fixed route services in their communities, and then once that was completed in a couple of those communities, that was handed off then to consulting firms to develop the operational implementation plan. So, some practice for students to be involved in doing some of that analysis, but then moving on into, again, to the consulting firms. Next slide, please. So some of the issues associated with the direct technical assistance within Kansas is just being able to respond equitably across the state, and I mentioned at the beginning the issue of the requests that come in throughout the course of the year. Excuse me, and making sure that that we're able to respond throughout the state, that projects aren't just picked, that we're kind of on the east side of the state, and our state is 200 by 400 miles wide, which my co-presenters are all large states or much larger than we are, but that can be a long drive out to southwest Kansas. But making sure that we're looking at ways to respond throughout the state to all of the providers, and that those requests are considered based on their ability to be applied to other parts of the state, and then also making sure that when some of that direct technical assistance is provided, that we look for ways to share those results to the other providers, as well as outside of our state, for that matter, through fact sheets, newsletter articles, or other resource materials. Kind of resource capabilities, looking at, a couple of the presenters mentioned electronic, moving towards more webinars, as far as, and we have access through the university to Adobe Connect Pro, and looking for the appropriate application of those electronic resources, because quite frankly, just webinars just don't work for all purposes. But there are some very specific applications that it's a good resource to be able to use. And we've been able, I mentioned some of the support that we were providing for the regionalized service, and doing some of that analysis in terms of travel markets, and did some of the work initially, did on-site meetings, that required 2 or 3 or 4 hours of travel to get to those communities. And once they'd gotten familiar with some of the information, then did some follow-up meetings with additional questions and additional kind of steps of analysis that they were asking for by webinars with the individual planning committees. And that worked very well, and was able to conserve on some travel resources that way. And then finally, just taking advantage of the expertise and the network that has grown so tremendously in the 25 years that we've been involved with RTAP and the kinds of things that we have access to now that really weren't there at the beginning. And so from national RTAP, from peer states, peer communities, and really being able to to utilize those resources and not have to create everything from scratch at the beginning. So next slide, please. So in summary, we try to respond to those requests directly, or if it's beyond the scope of our expertise or our capabilities, looking for a match with available resources. I mentioned looking for the opportunities to share results of technical assistance with others in the state and beyond. We've been able to leverage resources by our placement in the university, so making use of student resources as well as other kinds of resources like the subscription to the webinar software, some of those kinds of things. And then finally, just trying not to overpromise, so being very methodical in terms of looking at each of the projects or the requests that come in and try to make sure that we're able to respond appropriately and identifying those areas where we and communicating that up front if we see that as kind of beyond what we're able to do in an effective way. Next slide. And that's my contact information. I didn't put our contact information with KDOT, but if anyone's interested in that, I can get that to you so you can, contact them through, for KDOT perspective. Jim Perez is the new manager. He's been there since this spring, and so we're doing lots of activities together and getting oriented in terms of looking at kind of future developments in the program. So I'd like to close with that, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Pat. Our last speaker for today is going to be Bill Telovsky with New York State DOT. Bill?
Thanks, Shannon, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody, depending on which time zone you're listening in from. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about what New York State Department of Transportation does specific to direct technical assistance. I'm part of our Public Transportation Bureau. We're a small organization within New York State DOT. Next slide. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the what rural transportation looks like in New York State. So basically the map, it's a very large state. As my co-presenters all are in very large states as well. We're based on the eastern side of the state, but if you look, all those yellow shaded areas are where all of our 5311 recipients are. We have 5311 grantees in our program. We have a very large intercity bus program which connects a lot of those rural areas into the urban areas. So we have 8 intercity bus operators in our program as well, plus also mixed in, which aren't showing on the map because it would just look really messy, are another 269 active 5310 recipients scattered across the state, and 10 unique grantees for 5316 and 5317 projects, whether it's those being Jobs Access, Reverse Commute, and New Freedom projects scattered around the state too, that where the grantee is not necessarily a recipient of any of the other 5311 or 5310 funds. So next slide. With how we approach direct technical assistance in New York is we have administered all of the federal programs in-house. We haven't contracted out like some of the other presentations you've heard earlier. So we utilize our staff to reach out individually phone, email meetings to provide that direct technical assistance, whatever the issue may be. We encourage peer exchange between transit operators to provide that direct technical connection, and we certainly also encourage folks to take advantage of the national RTAP technical assistance resources that are available. So I wanted to talk briefly just a little bit about our state-administered RTAP program, some of the direct technical assistance that we offer through training conferences and regional meetings, and also our mobile bus simulator. So next slide. Okay. With our state-administered RTAP program, like I mentioned earlier, it's housed internally within our agency. We utilize an RTAP advisory committee made up of 12 different funding recipients across the state, so that they give us advice on hot topics, how we should program funding. We utilize our RTAP to cover all of our eligible rural 5311, 5310, 5316, and 17 recipients. A large part of our RTAP program is a scholarship program. We get several hundred requests a year to go to various training and conferences that are provided. We'll go through all of the organizations, but just listed a few there, some of the places where our folks benefit from our RTAP program. Next slide, please. We also provide direct technical assistance through training and conferences and regional meetings. I've got a list of some of the training classes that we've sponsored or partnered with our larger organizations with. Drug and alcohol has been a hot topic of late in New York State. We've worked with our larger operator in the Capital District, CDTA, and we're trying to do more of those partnerships where if they're offering a class, we make seats available to some of our neighboring rural participants. Also doing other training classes on community mobility or demand, etc. Next slide, please. We also do a lot of conferences and regional meetings because it's difficult for folks to travel, so we try to go to them as much as possible. We typically have a spring and fall conference that's partnered with our Transit Association, and we're working on a fall conference track geared towards our RTAP eligible recipients in partnership with our NIFTA Fall Conference. So that's coming up in a few months. We do regional grant application workshops for sub-recipients, whether they're try to get out in the field as much as possible and go around. We also do some phone conferences. There are other topics that we've looked at, coordination and cost savings. It's been a big topic, so we've been partnering, trying to foster partnerships out in the field a lot to achieve some efficiencies. So next slide, please. And last but not least, in 2007, we purchased a mobile bus driver training simulator, which is housed at one of our small urban systems down in Binghamton. The simulator seats 8 students. We move that around the state as folks request it, and we ask that they provide training not only to their own organizations but neighboring organizations. It's a great tool to have out there. We provide a train-the-trainer type format where the host system, we bring the trainer or 2 trainers in for training on how the system works, and they take some of the modules and customize them and provide their training as they see fit for their particular operations. And more information on simulators was provided in a National RTAP brief back in 2009. So, next slide, please. So with that, we do a lot of direct technical assistance with our existing staff, and have my contact information if you want to talk further offline after this, or well, I think we're ready to open up for questions now.
Great, yes, thank you, Bill. That was fantastic. And I'd like to thank all the presenters who joined us this morning, or afternoon now, as you had said. So I think right now Frank is going to be moderating the question and answer session. So Frank?
Yes, I'm going to, hold on one second here. I'm going to launch a question for everybody. You guys can see that and answer it. And then once we get the answers for that, we will open up the, start asking questions that were posted. We'll give you guys about 20 seconds to do that. Still waiting on a couple more to answer, and we can move on. Shannon, why don't you go ahead and explain this poll question to them?
Sure. What we had done earlier in the year, the first time we had all the RTAP managers together, is we asked what types of topics you would like to talk about and hear presenters present on. So we've used a couple of those. We have the state-level driver training, and today's we have the technical assistance. So we just wanted to get some ideas of what you would like to hear about for our next RTAP managers call. And it looks like the winner, with 40% today, is contracting out your RTAP program, the costs and benefits. So we'll be putting together the presentations based on that topic for the next call. Great, and thank you for doing that, Frank.
No problem. Let me open up the questions here and see what we have. Says I have a conflict in, let me see. Question for Pat. Is the Medicaid patient research online, and if so, where? Let me just unmute her. Go ahead, Pat.
Could you repeat the question again?
Sure. It says, is the Medicaid patient research online, and if so, where can they find it?
It is not online, but it's something that I can provide electronically. So if someone wanted to, yeah, but someone just wanted to let me follow up and let me know, I'd be glad to send it to them.
If you have a question for any of the presenters today, go ahead and type that in the white box below the question module, and I'll be happy to ask that to our presenters. How does KU identify topics for applied research?
Well, there's a variety of ways, but of those that are probably most closely related to the RTAP program, it comes in from a lot of times it'll come from questions, or we're hearing a number of questions from the transit agencies, and sometimes it's then in consultation with those agencies as well as with KDOT staff, and there may be others. We have I didn't mention the statewide coordinating council, which was part of the United We Ride effort, and is represented by a number of state agencies, and so some of those topics get introduced in that forum, and in consultation with KDOT. We may identify that is something that can be done within the scope of RTAP, or in some cases they've provided some supplemental funding to look at a particular issue. So it just kind of depends on how big the effort is, and whether it's considered something that's closely enough related to RTAP activities, and what is the most direct benefit to the 5311 agencies, and that may be incorporated in RTAP, or like I say, it may be funded in a different way. Much as Jay mentioned with Cutter, our program, includes a lot of other research activities, and so we may have some funding sources in other ways, and some of those activities may be related to rural public transportation, and so some of that research activity may then just be identified for outreach and dissemination to the field. But through the course of the year, it often comes. The questions are coming from the field, and then we're looking for the appropriate mechanism to to kind of house that particular project.
Thank you, Pat. This question is for all presenters, and maybe, Pat, you could start with your answer. Mm-hmm. Have recent budget constraints affected your ability to provide technical assistance?
Well, yes, I'd say, for the past probably 5 or 6 years, KDOT has provided supplemental funding to, some additional supplemental funding to the RTAP program, just as part of the program, and not, I mentioned the, possibly supplemental programs for applied research, but they had provided some additional state funding for RTAP activities, and they are still doing that. They cut that back a little bit this year, just because, not because they wanted to, but resource constraints to be able to do that. And then, quite frankly, just other, increased costs like around travel. So, gas prices have really made us look at, how, some of the trips that we make and how we need to conserve because our travel budget gets consumed more quickly because of that. So those are two major areas, I think. But there was a slight cutback in this year's program over what we had been funded for the past 4 or 5 years, and I think what will continue to be a concern at least into the next year.
Thank you, Pat. And Bill, how about from New York?
Hey, Frank. Yeah, I would definitely say our ability has been significantly reduced with recent budget cuts. It seems like we've been in that cycle for many years now, where especially from a staffing perspective, where we've experienced cuts over time, both at the state level and also out in the transit agencies themselves, either through cuts or retirements that we've seen. So we've lost a lot of knowledge base within the state as well as outside, so it makes it more difficult with losing that to provide technical assistance on a timely basis.
Thank you, Bill. And Jackie, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, we had a cut in funding for the last 2 years based on compared to what we had before. So we decreased the number of workshops that we usually offer. And we've also, the good thing though, like Pat and some of the other presenters talked about, and Jay, is we do leverage a lot being part of our association, like conferences. We pay, the association pays for most of the meals and all the other costs associated with that. So we help leverage what we can. We have a lot of board members that will provide direct technical assistance that I can call upon as part of the association, but they're also rural providers. But I think the biggest thing that we've found is we've gone to more and more individual technical assistance because it's difficult for our agencies with their cuts to be able to travel. So the webinars, the direct technical assistance, and the electronic information has been, I think, the biggest crucial things because of the fact that people don't have money to travel. It's even difficult for a lot of our agencies to get to conferences to justify that within our agency. So it has affected us, but we're still trying to be creative to provide assistance to our rural agencies because I think they need it now even more than ever. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. And Jay, how about from your perspective?
We really haven't been impacted by budget cuts. Now the support the state provides Cutter has been really, well, it's been stagnant for the last 6 years. But They also provide, the RTAP through the state provides funding assistance to help support the rodeo and also help provide some subsidized registrations for the Transportation Disadvantage Conference. If the state and both at the central and district office might have had some limited staff or some staff cutbacks, if anything, we've kind of benefited because they have less people to work with. So our programs really haven't grown significantly where there hasn't been any major deductions. The other big thing in Florida is we have a very strong, the Florida Public Transportation Association is a very healthy and strong organization that provides that mid-year professional development workshop we hold in May and June of each year. We've been able to provide that both for the transit systems and then any of the RTAP agencies at really no registration fee. And most of our training classes funded through DOT are also offered at no registration fee, where the agencies just have to have their staff person be able to attend, the travel and any travel-related costs. And so we're not gaining things, but we really haven't had any significant reductions.
Thank you, Jay. We have one more question. Will this webinar be posted on the National RTAP.org website? I can answer that. Yes, it will, and we should have it up by late Friday afternoon, this coming Friday. There are no more questions in the queue. I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon.
Great. Thank you, Frank. I'd like to thank everybody for calling in today, especially our presenters for sharing their technical assistance programs. Make sure you mark your calendars. The next RTAP Managers webinar will be taking place on November 3rd, and we'll be talking about contracting out your RTAP program, which we just voted on. So thanks everybody so much for calling in today, and we hope to talk to you again in November.